Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program and where you can find other exclusive programs regarding Somalia and the wider globe in general. And finally, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines. And we kick off in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and their elections are set to take place quite soon, and I thought I'd give the viewers a little bit of context into what is actually going on in the Congo, the Republic of Congo that is, and how things have gone for the last 5 years. So President Felix, the current incumbent president, assumed the presidency of the DRC in 2019 with little political experience. His entry into politics was triggered by the death of his father, an iconic opposition figure who confronted both Mobutu, who was another iconic figure, and the long-running Kabila dynasty. And this thrusted Felix into the limelight and eventually to the presidential palace in Kinshasa. Now, after a disputed 5-year term marked by significant economic and political challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic, 2 Ebola outbreaks, resurgent rebel groups, and escalating tensions with neighboring Nairobi, Felix is once again on the ballot. In this election, he contends with the formidable opposition, employing a more strategic approach rather than his initial bid for the presidency. Now, during his first term, Felix grappled with the political complexities, initially forming a coalition with heavyweight Joseph Kabila, his father's adversary. Now, this collaboration proved challenging, with the ruling faction lacking a parliamentary majority for several months. Now, his opposition, or his critics, have highlighted that he's a weak president initially, asserting that Kabila controlled the situation during this collaboration. However, Felix later surprised observers by sidelining Kabila's allies and consolidating his position. As the December 20th election approaches, Felix faces the prospect of a second peaceful transition of power in the DRC's 63 years of independence. However, his popularity has waned over time, and formidable opponents like Musa Katimubi pose challenges to his re-election. Now, critics argued that Felix's administration made controversial decisions, but its supporters credit him with significant economic achievements. Now, in terms of security, Felix's administration continues to grapple with persistent violence in eastern DRC, fueled by over 30 years of insecurity. Now, armed groups in different regions across the east have inflicted suffering, with M23 and the Allied Democratic Forces, or the ADF, causing the most havoc. Now, Felix's push for regional troop deployment and withdrawal of UN peacekeeping forces faces challenges. Now, criticism surrounds the state of emergency imposed in North Kivu and Tiru provinces since May 2021, giving the military broad powers, but also leading to a crackdown on civilians, critics have pointed out. Now, poverty and corruption remain a concern in the country, with the DRC being one of the world's poorest countries, despite its vast mineral wealth making it one of the most wealthiest countries in terms of wealth. Now, corruption persists and hopes for accountability have been dashed, according to critics. Now, despite these challenges, Felix's government has achieved notable successes, including the World Bank-supported free primary education, an IMF deal to boost state coffers. The state budget has increased under Felix, with badly negotiated mining contracts being reviewed. As the election approaches, opinions on Felix's second term vary. Now, supporters hope for continued change, while skeptics, including Malikisa, his opposition, express concerns about the potential tensions with Rwanda and the reliance on a ruling class associated with historical problems. The question of a free and fair election looms large, given past disputes, complaints about voter cards, and allegations of election rigging. Now, in conclusion, Felix's legacy remains a subject of debate, with the election outcome and its aftermath carrying significant implications for DRC's political landscape over the next 10 years. Now, over to North Africa and Libya, where more than 60 migrants are believed to have drowned in a shipwreck off the coast of Libya, the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, said. Now, citing survivors, the UN agency said on Saturday that the vessel left the city of Zuwara with around 86 people on board. It said high waves swamped the boat and 61 migrants, including children, were missing or presumed dead. Now, Libya is among the main departure points for migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe from Africa. Now, the IOM estimates that more than 2,200 people have drowned while attempting the crossing this year alone, making it one of the most dangerous migration routes in the world. Now, the IOM agency said most of the victims of the latest incident were from Nigeria, Gambia, Libya, and other African countries, AFP news agency reports. Now, it also said 25 survivors had been transferred to the Libyan detention center and were being given medical support. Now, writing on X, an IOM spokesperson called the death toll for this year a dramatic number, which unfortunately demonstrates that not enough is being done to save lives at sea. In June, at least 78 people died and another 100 were rescued after a fishing boat sank off southern Greece. Now, Mediterranean crossings frequently see scores of migrants crowded into boats too small to safely hold them, and those making the trip are typically hoping to land in Italy before making their way to other countries in Europe, some escaping conflict or persecution, while others are in search of work as economic migrants. Now, more than 153,000 migrants have arrived in Italy this year alone from Tunisia and Libya, according to the UN IOM Refugee Agency. Now, over to neighbouring Chad, where about 8 million people are registered to vote and are set to participate in Sunday's referendum in Chad to decide whether the country should adopt a new constitution. Now, the yes vote, supported by the coalition, including the military-led transitional government and the main opposition UNDR party, seems to have significant advantage. Now, during the 20-day campaign, the yes camp utilizes access to public resources and political influence, holding large meetings across the country, in contrast to the no camp, comprising opposition parties and civil society groups, which faces financial constraints, intimidation from security forces highlighted by some critics at least, and leading to calls for a boycott. Now, the lead up to the referendum has been sparked by a lack of transparency, according to critics, in voting registration and auditing, raising concerns about the fairness of the process. Now, analysts believe the yes vote is likely to prevail, with accusations of illegal means being employed. Some critics argue that the referendum is designed to pave the way for the current transitional president, General Mohammed Idris Deby, continuing a political dynasty initiated by his late father 33 years ago. Now, opponents of the new constitution expressed concerns that it neglects the unresolved question of whether Chad should transition to a federal state or remain centrally governed. Now, the central government structure, entrenched in the proposed constitution, has been a point of contention. Those supporting a federal state argue that the central government has failed to develop Chad, while proponents of the central state fear further fragmentation due to religious, ethnic and tribal divisions. Now, the junta, or the military government led by Mohammed Deby, following his assumption of power in April 2021, has outlined a roadmap for the transition back to civilian rule. However, the referendum's failure to address the preference for a federal or central system has led to skepticism and accusations of predetermined outcomes. The lack of clarity and inclusivity in the process has contributed to the sense of disappointment following the national dialogue held back in April to October of 2022. Now, elections initially scheduled for October 2022 have been delayed until October of next year. Now, over to neighbouring Mali, where the United Nations mission in Mali has officially ended a 10-year deployment in the country, its spokesperson said in a pullout ordered by the Mali military government. The mission, known as the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, lowered the UN flag in its headquarters in the capital Bamako, its spokesperson Fatoumata Kaba told AFP news agency on Monday. And the symbolic ceremony marks the official end of the mission, she said, even though some of the elements are still there. A liquidation phase will take place after January 1st, involving activities such as handing over any remaining equipment to authorities. Now, in June, Mali's military government, which seized power in 2020, demanded departure of the mission, deployed since 2013, despite being in the grip of attacks by armed groups in the Sahel region. The withdrawal of the UN troops has ignited fears that the fighting will intensify between Malian forces and armed groups for territorial control. The mission had maintained about 15,000 soldiers and police in Mali for the past decade. About 180 members have been killed in hostile attacks. Now, as of Friday this week, more than 10,500 uniformed and civilian UN personnel have left Mali, out of a total of 13,800 staff at the start of the withdrawal, the UN mission said on X. Since being told to leave, the UN has left 13 positions in Mali and has yet to close sites in Gao and Timbuktu in the north. Now, last week, the UN mission handed over the Moptai camp in central Mali, one of the hotbeds of violence that has plagued the Sahel for years. Now, the Moptai camp most recently housed peacekeepers from Bangladesh and Togo, and in the past hosted Egyptians, Pakistani and Senegalese contingents. Now, the pullouts went smoothly, unlike recent withdrawals in Mali in volatile north, which took place on the phase of military escalation between the army and the rebels. Now, the UN troops were initially welcomed by Malians, who hoped that the foreign soldiers would be able to help the Malian army drive back the rebels who had captured large swathes of land in 2013. 10 years on, however, the UN peacekeeping forces are leaving unceremoniously, with the instability far from being resolved. Thousands of people have been killed and hundreds of thousands have been displaced by the violence. And many in Mali were questioning, after 10 years, a decade of UN foreign troops, of various different countries, what actually has been achieved, because the north remains a volatile region. Rebels continue to grow, militants continue to grow and increase violence. So the Mali government ultimately decided a logical outcome, which was, what steps are we going to take forward now that this has been going on for 10 years and nothing's being achieved? Now, after seizing power in August 2020, citing mounting insecurity, Mali's initial government, the initial junta government, ditched the alliance with the former colonial power France, preferring a reapproachment of Moscow and the private army Wagner Group. And then another military takeover happened in May 2021. Now, the presence of the mercenaries has drawn strong condemnation from Western countries who are at odds with Russia, who argue that the presence of Wagner threatens Mali's stability. Now, Moscow and Bamako continue to insist that Russian fighters are merely trainers, helping local soldiers combat the rebel groups. And finally, over to Niger, where a West African court outside of Niger has ruled that the ousted president of Niger himself, Mohamed Bazoum, and his family have been arbitrarily detained and called for his reinstatement. Now, Bazoum was overthrown by members of his presidential guard in July 26th of this year and has been detained at home with his wife and children ever since. Now, the coup was widely condemned and prompted sanctions from West Africa's main political and economic bloc, the Economic Community of West African States. And this was being pushed by the US and its Western allies at that time, which perceived the coup as a major threat to interests in the region. Now, on Friday, ECOWAS's Court of Justice, sitting in Abuja, ordered Nigeria's military government to re-establish the constitutional order through Bazoum's reinstatement. Now, the judge called for his immediate release and unconditional release. According to his lawyer, Bazoum filed a lawsuit before the court on September 16 to free him. Nigerian military government also filed a suit before the court in November to order the lifting of sanctions imposed on the country by ECOWAS. The request was denied this December. And those are the top stories from the African continent on the program today. Please tune in next week on HORUFADHI TV for the headlines across the continent.